And welcome to Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall. On behalf of the Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall Commander, Colonel Kimberly A. Peeples, welcome to the Bakers Creek Memorial Ceremony, commemorating the 75th anniversary of the air crash in Queensland, Australia, a tragedy that took the lives of 40 Army Air Corps service members during World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the singing of the National Anthem and remain standing for the invocation. The National Anthem will be sung by Master Sergeant Pablo Talamante from the United States Army Band, Pershing Zone. The invocation will be given by Chaplain Tammy Cruz, Deputy Command Chaplain for the Military District of Washington.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose brass stripes and bright stars to the perilous fight, while the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket glade of unfested in her gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Let us pray. Gracious God, on this beautiful day we are gathered to remember a tragic event. We commemorate the lives and legacy of the American soldiers who were tragically killed on 14 June 1943 at Bakers Creek, Queensland, Australia, in the worst accident involving a transport plane in the Southwest Pacific during World War II. We think of each of those 40 Army Air Corps soldiers that were aboard that ill-fated B-17 Flying Fortress aircraft on 14 June as they were returning to their duties from R&R. We remember the families they left behind. We also honor the life of the crash's sole survivor, Corporal Foy Kenneth Roberts, and the life you graciously gave to him. Bless their memory, and may we honor the legacy they left behind through unfailing service to you and to our country. On this 243rd birthday of the United States Army, we honor the sacrifices of all of our men and women who serve and have served in the United States Army and their families. We pray for those who today are deployed in harm's way. As we look across these fields of honor, we cherish the memory of all of those who gave all of their tomorrows, that we might enjoy all of our todays. Help us to live worthily of their sacrifice, and we will remember them. Let freedom ring. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Thank you, Master Sergeant Talamante and Captain Cruz. The aircraft, a Boeing B-17C, serial number 40-2072, known as Miss Every Morning Fixin', took off from Mackay Airfield just before dawn at about 6 a.m. in foggy conditions, headed for Port Moresby. Soon after, it made a low-altitude turn, and a few minutes later, it crashed. The cause of the crash remains a mystery, a tragedy that took the lives of 40 Army Air Corps service members during World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the wreath laying. The wreath from the Embassy of Australia will be laid by Air Commodore Terry Von Herder, Australian Air Attaché, and Corporal Jenna Cole, Air Staff Officer. The wreath from Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall will be laid by Colonel Kimberly Peeples, Joint Base Commander, and General Ralph Eberhart, U.S. Air Force retired. Taps will be played by Sergeant First Class Matthew Byrne, bugler with the United States Army Band, Pershing Zone. Placing the wreaths is in tribute to the 40 victims of the Bakers Creek tragedy. As they place the wreaths, please remember these brave Americans who made the ultimate sacrifice. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce the commander of Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall, Colonel Kimberly Peeples.
General Eberhardt, Mrs. Eberhardt, Air Commodore Van Haren, Miss Hurd, Mr. Araz Riveros, Dr. and Mr. Cutler, honored guests, good afternoon. I am honored to welcome you to Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall, as we gather on this, the 75th anniversary of the World War II plane crash at Bakers Creek. This memorial was a long time coming. We dedicated the Bakers Creek Memorial here at Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall for the first time in 2009. This memorial honors the memory of 40 American lives lost in the deadliest airplane crash in the Southwest Pacific Theater during World War II. Secretary of the Army Peter Guerin called the ceremony the closing of one of the Second World War's final chapters. It is fitting that the memorial found its home here, with Arlington National Cemetery serving as a dramatic backdrop. Today we gather to remember the service and lives of these members of the Army Air Corps who lost their lives aboard a B-17C Flying Fortress near Mackay, Queensland, Australia on June 14, 1943. After a much-deserved R&R from the flight in the Pacific, these American patriots boarded their B-17 transport just before dawn to head back to New Guinea. There were 6 crew members and 35 passengers aboard. The plane took off in a dense fog, and for reasons unknown today, it crashed shortly after takeoff. All were killed except for one survivor, Corporal Floyd Kenneth Roberts. This memorial is a tribute to the 40 lives lost. The site was selected, as many of you know, next to the Selfridge Gate located just behind me. This gate is named for Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, the first Army fatality of military-powered flight back in 1908 aboard the Wright Flyer aircraft. Flown by Orville Wright, the Flyer crashed when one of the propellers shattered and the plane fell from an altitude of 75 feet in the area of the parking lot just behind you, back in this way. This is a very fitting site, and we are proud to host this important memorial. Several years ago, my Uncle Steve and Aunt Betty Walter brought me and my husband John to this exact site and recounted the events of this significant historical event. My Aunt Betty's uncle, Second Lieutenant Jack Ogren, was a member of the crew. He was the navigator. This event today touches me both personally and professionally. I appreciate the opportunity as the commander of this historic joint base, to honor the memory of these brave servicemen annually, together with the Bakers Creek family and the Australian Embassy. Before I close, I would like to recognize and thank Dr. Robert Cutler. He is the son of the soldier Captain Sam Cutler, who scheduled the Bakers Creek flight on that fateful day and saw the soldiers off just before the crash. It has been through Dr. Cutler's tireless efforts and those of the Bakers Creek Memorial Association that this memorial rests here today. So we thank you. I would also like to extend a very special thank you to the Embassy of Australia. Thank you, Air Commodore Van Haren and Corporal Kowald. We are honored by your presence today. We are sincerely grateful for you and the ambassador's continued support of this annual ceremony. Thank you, General Eberhardt, for taking the time from your busy schedule to be here and for your ongoing support. And thanks to all of you here today, honored guests, for joining us as we remember these 40 American soldiers and to ensure that this part of American history is not forgotten. We also express gratitude to their families for having made the ultimate sacrifice. Army strong.
Thank you, Colonel Peeples. Please welcome our next speaker, the Air Attaché from the Embassy of Australia in Washington, D.C., Air Commodore Terry Von Haren.
Oh, g'day, folks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, it's a great honour for me to be here today to represent, firstly, the head of mission, the Ambassador, His Excellency Mr. Joe Hockey, but also the Royal Australian Air Force and the people of Mackay in Queensland who look after the other site, our sister site, the memorial site at Bakers Creek. And lastly, the Australian people who also share Peeples Creek. Now, I'm a little bit unscripted, and I thought I would talk about a couple of things, but first I might mention it's a beautiful day here at Fort Myer. And I was just talking to Bob, and he was at Mackay last week, and it's around about the same temperature and very similar, sunny day. So there is great reflection on the other side of the earth there, where this event is always remembered. And what I really want to mention is the special relationship that we have, not only with the United States, but memory and memorial. And this year we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of what we call mateship. And I'd like to explain what that means in my terms. Now, mateship is a friendship that's formed in adversity. It's a friendship that is often unconditional, and it's a friendship which is enduring. It actually goes right back into our DNA. I sometimes say that the first convicts came to Australia as shipmates, and after 6 months of travel across the oceans in great peril, they had developed mateship. We really celebrate in Australia where we really realised what it was in terms of a value, and that's why we celebrate Anzac Day, our first day of memorial. And that's because our boys sailed halfway around the world, stormed the beach, and 8,500 of them died for no real gain. They went there to fight for king and country, to end up fighting for each other. And that friendship formed in adversity was tested day and day again, and they sacrificed their lives for their mates. And of course that's become an enduring quality in the Australian psyche. So I want to actually talk about that in the context of what we're here to do today, and that is to remember the tragedy at Bakers Creek 75 years ago. These young men that we remember today had come to Australia in a great time of adversity and peril in the Pacific, and like many other of our friends and mates, the Americans, were there to fight tyranny, but also, in the conscience of Australia, actually defend our nation. And it was truly a tragedy, a great adversary. These 40 men were lost in one air accident in Australia. And we truly understand and feel the gravity of that loss. We also say that mateship's about unconditional friendships, but often having unconditional, at least that sacrifice. And that is the second element here. It was a great tragedy, but we also recognise that these men would sacrifice their lives in a time of war for our survival, for our defence, and for our values of freedom, our value of mateship, and everything else we share between our two countries. And the last element is mateship in our terms is an enduring friendship. And as we celebrate 100 years of mateship, stepping back to the Battle of La Hamel, which was fought on the 4th of July 1918, I can tell you that this memory of the sacrifice of these young men is enduring, now 75 years into the future, and will endure for evermore. I know the ode is coming up, but we always say at the end of the ode in Australia, lest we forget. And I'd like to finish with that too, lest we forget these young men. Thank you.
Thank you, Air Commodore Von Hart. At this time, I would like to ask Ms. Charlotte Hurd, Military Liaison for United States Senator Mark Warner, to please step up to the podium.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, like to extend a happy 243rd birthday to the United States Army. And I'd also like to thank all the veterans and those still in uniform for your service to our nation. Senator Warner could not make it today, but I do have a letter to read on his behalf. Dear friends, I am writing to extend my warmest greetings to all who are gathered for the Bakers Creek Memorial Ceremony at Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall. Today, Americans remember the 40 soldiers who lost their lives in an airplane crash in the Southwest Pacific during World War II 75 years ago. Without hesitation, these American heroes put themselves into harm's way to ensure the welfare and safety of their fellow citizens. We are all indebted to them for their service. We must always remember that the best way to honor those who gave their lives in the past is to continue to support the servicemen and women who are fighting every day for our future. I send my best wishes for a fulfilling ceremony. Sincerely, Mark R. Warner, United States Senator.
Thank you, Ms. Hurd. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, the Chairman and President of the Armed Forces Benefit Association, General Ralph Elbert, U.S. Air Force retired.
Thank you very much. What an honor and a privilege it is for me to participate this afternoon. First of all, thanks, Colonel Peeples, to you and your team for making this a ceremony of remembrance that's dignified and is appropriate. And again, the Army's looking a little bit older today, so happy 243rd. Army strong, America's Army, and I'm very, very proud of it. Commodore, I reinforce what you said about the relationship between our two great nations. Obviously, a common birth as colonies of England. Our frontiers were settled by people that believed in the same very basic values of freedom, the rule of law, and to some degree we have a common language. And when I think about the 5th Air Force, which I had the pleasure to command, and which operated in this theater of operation, I think of the colors of the Australian flag and 5th Air Force flag. Both have the constellation, the Southern Cross constellation, which 5th Air Force is very, very proud of. When I think about this human tragedy, the 40 lives lost, I can't help but think about their experiences on R&R before they returned to Guinea. The conversations that unfolded, the talk about home, the talk about their farms, their factories, their stores, their shops, their families, their girlfriends, all reflections, but also their goals, their dreams, their aspirations. Sadly, goals, dreams, and aspirations that would never be realized. They obviously talked about the war, and they knew that it was going to be a long slog in the Pacific, because the European theater of operation took priority. And then the Allies were going to swing their forces to the Pacific and ensure victory. They undoubtedly talked about the Doolittle Raid in April of 42, the Battle of Coral Sea in May of 42, and the turning point of the war by most historians, the Battle of Midway in June, just 2 weeks or 1 week prior to this disaster. We won the Battle of Midway in the first week of June in 1943. So as you think about those conversations, and you think about them boarding this EMF every morning fixing. You had to fix it every morning. It's what we call today a hangar queen. An airplane that doesn't fly a lot. An airplane that doesn't fly a lot. That airplane in the early days of the war, in fact, December of 1941, returned from a bombing raid with 1,000 plus bullet holes. 1,000 plus bullet holes. So I would offer to you today as a combat veteran that these young men were a victim to enemy fire, just like as if they were a gunner on the ground that day. And I'd close by paraphrasing George Patton. When he was dedicating a cemetery in Italy, he said, "Today we should not mourn these men. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived." God bless.
Thank you, General Eberhard. I am now pleased to introduce the Executive Director of the Bakers Creek Memorial Association, Dr. Robert Cutler.
Thank you all for being here today. I want to give special recognition to Colonel Peeples, Air Commodore Van Haren, General Eberhard, Captain Cruz, the Reverend Beverly Davis Seary, and distinguished guests. Senator Bob Dole and former Australian Senator Santo Santoro send their regrets. They're not available to be with us today. On behalf of the Bakers Creek Memorial Association, that's the families and friends of the crash victims, from 23 states across the United States, we thank you for your spirit and your leadership in conducting this annual ceremony to affirm the values that those 40 members of the Army Air Corps died for in World War II. And to our Australian friends from the U.S. Embassy, from the Australian Embassy, and Colonel Colin Benson, the RSL historian, again with us today from Australia. The 75th commemoration is a significant event in both countries. 10 days ago, in Australia, a similar commemoration ceremony was held near the crash site at Bakers Creek, an annual event that the Mackay Regional Council has performed for the past 26 years. We thank you for your continued support for our bilateral national cause, to acknowledge the lasting bonds of military security and friendship between our two nations that was forged in New Guinea in 1942 at the Kokoda Trail and still exists today. At this time, I'd like to read from a letter sent by one of the family relatives to me over the past year, who unfortunately is not able to be with us today. My name is Al Frezza. Alfredo Enrico Frezza was the legitimate birth name of my uncle and my namesake. Tech Sergeant Alfred H. Freza, who died along with 39 of his fellow soldiers in the plane crash that now is memorialized in 2 countries and came to be known as the World War II Bakers Creek air crash disaster. The name Alfred H. Freza, Americanized as a defense against the discrimination toward foreigners, which sadly was so common at that time, was given to me in his honor upon my birth 83 years ago. Because of the wartime circumstances, we've come to know Uncle Alfred's body wasn't returned to our family until 1948. And while I was only 3 years old at the time, I have a very distinct memory of being present at his casket, which had been placed in the front room of our grandmother's home in Altoona, Pennsylvania. It occurs to me now that my grandmother probably thought about him daily and probably prayed with each memory. I do remember how intensely Grandma smiled when she looked at me, and how, when my friends or cousins called me by my nickname, she would say in broken English, "No, Bucky, Alfredo's a good name." And it occurs to me, too, that if it were not for Bob Cutler's desire to memorialize as a tribute to his father, Captain Samuel Cutler, Army Air Corps, with the forces in Australia, who, as Bob has stated, carried the hard memory of being the man who closed the door on that fated aircraft. And to call Benson's curiosity to find the names of those fallen soldiers who were passengers in that plane, I would not ever have learned anything more about Uncle Alfred than the title that I've come to know afterwards. But there is even more for which to be grateful. An additional measure of pride has evolved from all of this. A pride that our uncle was part of a group of very brave soldiers who delivered supplies to an even braver Australian soldiers on the ground who fought against the Japanese, saving Australia from enemy invasion. And there's a personal pride and a sense of belonging to something unique and important each time the Bakers Creek crash ceremony anniversary is commemorated. On behalf of our large family, beginning with Alfredo's remaining sibling, Arthur, who's now 89, down through all the offspring who still are learning the story, our sincere thanks to Bob and Carl for all that they have done over the years to passionately maintain the memorial. My most crisp salute to them and to all who selflessly assisted them over the years. My sincere thanks, good blessings to you all. Alfred H. Freza, Princeton, New Jersey. Like other patriotic commemorations, we believe it important, indeed our duty, to pay tribute and to remember the historic event. The unique feature of this tragedy not simply is the number of deaths, but rather the extraordinary loss that occurred to so many American families and Australian friends simultaneously. Some good news. Today I'm pleased to report that the 40th and final casualty family has been located. Last week, one of our volunteer genealogy researchers, Francesca Kumaro, in California, working with another internet sleuth, Sylvia Lay in Wisconsin, reported making positive contact with family relatives of the late PFC Frederick C. Sweet, the last of the 40 Bakers Creek crash victim families to be located. Looks like we're getting close to saying mission accomplished. Please stand and welcome Claire Gailey the daughter of the late Lieutenant Colonel C.K. Gailey and former board member of the Bakers Creek Memorial Association, and Colonel Colin E. Benson, Mackay RSL historian from Australia. Claire will read the names of the fallen as we place the flowers of remembrance in the green basket to the side of the memorial, after which Colonel Benson will recite the ode, a traditional battlefield benediction. Anyone wishing to place a flower, please step forward and take one from my wife Sarah to your right and place it in the green basket next to the monument.
Thank you, Bob. Private First Class Jerome Abraham. Captain John O. Berthold. Technical Sergeant William A. Briggs. Sergeant Dean H. Bussey. Technical Sergeant James A. Copeland. Sergeant Carl A. Cunningham. Staff Sergeant Lavelle Dale Curtis. Technical Sergeant George A. Ehrman. Flight Officer William C. Erb. Private James E. Finney. Sergeant Leo E. Fletcher. Technical Sergeant Alfredo H. Fressa. First Lieutenant Vern J. Gidcombe Jr. Private First Class Norman J. Getz. Staff Sergeant Roy A. Hatlin. Staff Sergeant John W. Hilsheimer. Private First Class Vernon Johnson. Sergeant Donald B. Kuiper. Staff Sergeant Charlie O. LaRue. Private Raymond D. Longabaugh. Private First Class Kenneth W. Mann. Corporal Marlon D. Metzger. Private Charles D. Montgomery. Second Lieutenant Jack A. Ogren. Private First Class John W. Parker. Private First Class Frank C. Pinksa. Major George N. Powell. Sergeant Anthony Rudnick. Corporal Charles W. Sampson. Private First Class Arnold Seidel. Corporal Jacob O. Skaggs, Jr. Corporal Franklin F. Smith. Corporal Raymond H. Smith. Private First Class Frederick C. Private First Class Frederick C. Sweet. Corporal Edward Tenney. Sergeant David E. Tileston. Private First Class Dale Von Fossen. Private Reuben L. Vaughn. Staff Sergeant Frank E. Welchel. Private First Class Charles M. Williams.
Floyd Roberts, the survivor. And our fallen colleague, C.K. Gailey, who I might add took us from about 18 names to 39. And I'm sure he's watching this today. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
Thank you, Dr. Cutler and Colonel Benson.
Excuse me, Dr. Cutler has a little bit more to say. Please be seated. For the past 15 years, the Bakers Creek Memorial Association, working together with the garrison staff and the Embassy of Australia, have performed annual ceremonies in Washington, D.C. to honor the survivor and the 40 American servicemen killed in the tragic Flying Fortress plane crash in Australia during World War II. Today, as we've said, we mark the 75th anniversary of the crash. Sadly, many of the casualty family members living in 23 states across the country no longer are able to attend these ceremonies. However, thanks to requests from the commanding general at PACAF and 5th Air Force in Japan and in Hawaii, respectively, and the professional video coverage made possible by the Public Affairs Office here at Fort Myer, others are now able to link in and watch these historic commemorative ceremonies by YouTube or other military network means. Therefore, the Board of Directors of the Bakers Creek Memorial Association, whose numbers have depleted over recent years, have decided to pass the torch during the next year to the next generation, to honor the sacred vigil and to sustain the spirit of the Bakers Creek Memorial Monument, emplaced here at Fort Myer by Act of Congress in 2007 and maintained by the Department of the Army a decade ago. At that time, Secretary of the Army wrote, quote, "In the years ahead, the Joint Base Myer Henderson Hall garrison will coordinate with the Bakers Creek casualty families and the Australian Embassy to conduct a dignified and appropriate ceremony on the anniversary date of the crash. For the past 10 years, we are grateful for the outstanding support we've received from the garrison and from the embassy. And we trust the garrison will continue to honor the spirit and sacrifice of those 40 Gold Star families whose tragic loss in World War II was born for our nation. Over the next year, we shall search for qualified co-sponsoring organizations to coordinate and serve as advocates for the fallen families. And to the families of the fallen, we thank you for their service. And we thank you for your sacrifice.
Thank you again, Dr. Cutler. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our ceremony. Joint Base Myer Henderson Hall Commander Colonel Peeples invites you to join her for some refreshments at Spates Community Hall, the building with the green awning directly across the parking lot. Thank you for your attendance this afternoon.
We have